In Teleportasm, four friends unearth a unique VHS tape that, when viewed, causes short distance teleportation with euphoric after effects. No one knows where it comes from or what the long term consequences may be, but some will risk anything and everything for one more trip.
And I don't really welcome people. I did this for fucking 10 years where I had like this
Right.
whole like format, and it was just it got so like crusty that
Sure.
I just like to just do the comfortable fun stuff. So I don't
Just
like,
do it.
right, exactly. So that's how we're going to start. But
Sounds great.
the thing I really want to key in on at the beginning of talking about your book, um, is not about the story at all, but it's something that kind of like bookends the story, which is the idea of friendship. So not only in the dedication, I believe it's a dedication, it's dedicated to like the idea of friendship kind of, but also in your afterword, you talked about, you outright said, like, if there's one message from the book, it's about friendship and not, like not neglecting friendships and how important they are. So like, that kind of thing. So very, very clearly, is a message in here that friendship is important. So, where does that come from? Was that something that inspired the story, or is it something that while writing the story you were like, "Oh man, this really makes me think of all these important friendships"? Or yeah, what's the story?
Sure. Well, I think I knew that I always wanted friendship to be a part of it. When I originally started my first draft of Teleportasm, it was focused much more on a friendship and a friend trying to reunite with a best friend. That plot line kind of went by the wayside, and I'm glad it did. What emerged is the Teleportasm that you will all experience. And the four main characters, Barry, Frankie, Snaps, and Lars, they all kind of remind me of myself in some ways and my friends who I hung out with at that post-college time in your life where everything just feels really exciting. And I miss those guys. I don't have friendships like that anymore. And I think that friendships like that are rare. And I think that it becomes clear reading Teleportasm, and it certainly doesn't take away from it to say this going in, that there's a drug metaphor there. And I think that if I'm being honest, and if you're going to look at it, it's about how crazy things like drugs can really ruin otherwise awesome connections. And that's a shame when it happens.
What you just said reminds me of that kind of feeling I had with, that you're in your early 20s and you got this core group and you just, it's like the world is so in front of you. So that does, yeah, I get that feeling out of that. But I was talking
Good.
to Richard Chismar about his book Becoming the Boogeyman, and in that book there is a whole thing where like it's a thing called Chisapalooza or something, where him and his friends get together once a year and have a big bash and everything.
Yeah.
And how important that sounded to, well, it really kind of like talking about those things highlights how much we don't have them in a way. And I told him that since the pandemic started, me and three other friends from like that I met in like the third grade, every other Monday we do a call for 2 hours where we just talk about whatever. And it started out as remembering our childhood and kind of capturing things and all that. Now it's just kind of like we hang out and talk. And only since I've been doing that do I realize how helpful that is and how important that is. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, but like as an adult, and I think particularly as an adult man, might be difficult to either see the value of those types of things or like how positive it can be to us,
Mm-hmm.
or just like know to try to make those things happen. Yeah.
Right. And I can tell that the connections you must have are really special. And I think something I say at the end of my book, too, is that you need those connections to kind of realize how far you've come. When I talk to guys who knew me back in high school, I realized how different I was then. And all of a sudden, your life has a lot more perspective. And
Yeah.
so I guess I just, a lot of those connections from high school and college, things that got screwed up over bullshit, I regret. And writing these scenes with Frankie and Lars and Snaps and Barry just really made me remember those fun, easy times and wish that I could give those guys a call again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's we don't know about those schisms, like when they're going to happen and how it's going to affect us. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's great. I loved the idea of friendship, because what I haven't acknowledged yet, what we haven't got into yet, is how crazy and fucked up the story gets because of kind of the main premise of the teleporting aspect of it, which we will absolutely talk about. Um, but yeah, like I like that there's a message that comes from a very personal place for it
Yeah.
that's living inside of this. Once people listen to some of the conversation we have, they're going to be like, that's about friendship.
Right. It's not obvious. I certainly don't hit anyone over the head with it. And it was just kind of, how I started, like I said, focusing on this group of friends in a very laid back, easy time in their lives. And then, the reflections at the very end, I'm not going to spoil anything, but, kind of putting myself in the shoes of the last person standing and imagining how that feels. And, yeah, friendship is a great thing. Teleportasm's not going to hit you over the head with it. You're going to have a good time. And if you think about your friends when you're done, well, that's good too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It did definitely kind of take me back to that situation. Like, I think
Good.
because we've all had that experience of like going from, like having that core group. So like it does, yeah. I think it's an easy way to kind of get people kind of connected with the characters,
Yeah.
for sure. Um, and I'm gonna bounce around. I'm not gonna do this like in any kind of specific order, but
That's
these are the
great.
thing. One thing I'm really excited about to talk about. It's kind of stupid, but in one of the first of all, I'll just acknowledge that the chatter I've seen so far, a lot of people are acknowledging a specific chapter as being particularly kind of gut punching, and so chapter 9 is absolutely one of the, I want to say, bleakest, most hopeless kind of moments in the story. And we can talk. I care about spoilers as much as you do, so
Sure.
um, I'm dancing around it now, but we can dig deeper into it. But before we talk about the what makes it so hopeless and bleak, there's a thing in there that is kind of personally, I thought was very entertaining because I live in Illinois, and it is the Seven Gates in Collinsville, Illinois.
Right.
So for anybody who's listening who's not aware of it, it's kind of an urban legendy thing where there's these seven, I guess, like I don't know, like overpasses, bridges. There's some like
Trellises.
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 Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. That you're supposed to pass through, and if you do it right, like you go to hell, basically.
Yeah. If you drive through all 7 in the same night, you end up in hell.
And so, first of all, why that comes up in this story is like the perfect kind of like encapsulation of why that is so bleak and stuff. But before we get to that, how did that get on your radar? Do you know Illinois much, or is it just something that you had heard of and you thought this was cool to incorporate?
Man, I am just such a fan of urban legends and creepypastas. And yeah, there's a point in that chapter where you basically get kind of a tour of a lot of these mystical places. There's the seven trellises. There's Toad Road, Amityville, the Amityville Horror House, one of the graveyards from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You kind of like go on a tour of all these places where you're likely to meet some sort of crazy, scary fate. And the seven gates of hell is always kind of stuck with me. It's such a vast metaphor, like you clued into, the idea of doing it and the motivation for doing it, and the way it could end. There are so many different ways that sort of quest could end. But yeah, I just love creepy pastas, and that's one of the things I was pulling from for that chapter.
That's awesome. It's something that I talked about in my previous podcast, where we were talking about urban legends and stuff like that. And specifically because I'm in Illinois, we wanted to find something local. And I am not a person who has any kind of superstition or belief in those things. So in the conversations, I'm like, I'll go there and do that. Like, I have no problem doing those things. There was another one, which is the elevator game. I don't know if you'd heard
Right,
of.
right, yeah.
Yeah. And anytime me and my besties get near a building that's got enough stories, I'm like, let's go do the elevator game. And they're like, no, we can't do
I'm the
that.
same way, man. It's like I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't think I'd want to spend the night in a dilapidated farmhouse with no electricity. I think I would be scared shitless, you know. So that's kind of the juxtaposition of it all. You know, supernatural horror is one of my favorite genres to watch. I love supernatural horror movies, but you know I don't believe in the supernatural. It's just because it's the getting close to believing it, or at least being able to feel that sensation. It takes something special to do that to me, and I love that feeling of
Yeah.
really being scared by something totally unknown.
Yeah. I'm trying to, cause like, yeah, I feel like I'm the same way, based on how you just described it. And I'm trying to think of what it is. Like, it's like the more I can be convinced, like the more entertaining or exciting it is, or something. I don't know, but yeah, I'm kind of with you on that.
It's kind of like why
Um,
I like conspiracy theories too, because I don't believe them, but the depths people will go to make it seem believable just
yeah,
fascinates me. And it's kind of like, go for it, convince me, you know. And some of these conspiracy theories get kind of close, you know, where I'm like, you're onto something, you know. Maybe it doesn't end with aliens, but you're onto something. There's, at the very least, there's an unspoken agenda there, if not an out and out conspiracy.
I'm gonna specifically say something that I'm gonna cut out, but I'm gonna leave in the part where I
Sure.
just said that, so that people are gonna be like, "What did he tell him?" Like,
Sure.
how much do we not know? How
Yeah.
much information? How many layers of information exist? Yeah. So,
Exactly.
um,
I love plumbing those layers, whether we get to the bottom or not. It's just a fun ride.
so all right, but so the I was flirting with, I was talking about kind of what the impact of chapter 9 was without really saying what happened, and we can go as deep as you want to, but with all of the things that you said about the tours of going to these like creepy places with all these kind of like, meanings behind them, really, like, to if I was to tease it to someone, I'd say, like, what would push someone to be in a mindset where they're like, I need to go to these places? Like, what would need to have happened to someone, right, to make them go down that kind of path?
Yeah, and you know, I like just posing that question. You know, you'd have to have gone through something quite extreme. You know, what I love about chapter 9, it's called Welcome to Dead World. I don't mind saying that out loud. I think it's great. You know, if someone bought the rights to Teleportasm to make a movie, they'd have like plenty of options. You could make a movie just out of chapter 9. You know, it's one of the things I love about how my book unfolds.
Yeah.
Um, but chapter 9 is the point in Teleportasm where the shit really hits the fan. Not in terms of the climax of the story, but that there's a tonal shift that comes there. And that's the part of the book that really kind of takes the concept and turns it from an idea into a universe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yep.
so, you know, I really felt that the placement of that was going to be significant, and that I felt that I will already have, you know, basically established what people can expect, you know,
Yeah.
by that time. And the chapter actually starts very in line with several of the other chapters, but just so happens to go in a completely unique direction. And from that point on, I think every chapter that follows is significantly darker.
Yes.
So it's just a great turning point. It's so unique in and of itself. You know, uh, every chapter in Teleportasm is kind of like informed by the chapters before it, even though there are some chapters that are almost seem like standalones. Welcome to Dead World is the only one that is more or less completely self-contained in that it gives enough of a backstory in the lead up. And yeah, I just love the fact that it's really grabbing people's attention and elevating the experience overall. It is, it is really sad. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
and the image that I got in my head imagining it was just, I think I understood how powerful that would be if I conveyed it properly. And I almost feel guilty about it. You know, it's so pessimistic. But I just think it is what it is, man. That's how it came out. And, you know, my editor, the publisher of Shortwave loved it. And like I said, like you've said, the early chatter, some people are mentioning chapter 9, and it impacted you as well too. So I can't wait for more people to discover it and to decide how it affects the story at large.
Well, I feel like we could probably do a whole episode just talking about that specific chapter, because
You're right.
There's so much going on there. So if we were like, we didn't care about spoilers, that's probably where I'd want to go. But it does kind of illustrate, first of all, it's like, I don't know if Twilight Zone is the right kind of comparison, or some of the more kind of like weird X-Files even episodes. Like, I think Twilight Zone
All
is
of the above.
yeah,
All of the above.
but and god damn, because it just smacks you when you realize, it just smacks you at the end of it. But that's not how the whole book is. And so that kind of the story inhabits so many different types of, like, I guess, storytelling styles, and like there's a lot of levity in some of them, and there's a lot of bleakness in other ones. And so because we're looking not at kind of the same characters all the time, you get to really, I think you gave yourself a real gift by being able to explore, like, what would a goofy thing that happens in this situation be, where someone has access to this teleportation. What would a really bleak thing be? What would the average person do? And the other thing would be, like, how do people talk about it? Like, how does it, become a part of culture? And so there's even, it becomes its own kind of urban legend or creepypasta
Exactly.
on its own. And that's one of my favorite things, was like, in one of the chapters, there's a talk about murder tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And you're reading this and you're like, but it's not. And then you're reading it, and so, like, but that's like, you're reading how people are reacting to what happens with the tape. So I think you gave yourself a real gift by looking at almost like vignettes of what a VHS tape that allows you to teleport orgasmically would do in different situations. And I know he's talked a lot, but yeah, I think that's one of the most valuable parts of the book, is like being able to see all of these different situations. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you hit on, is what, it's something that I played close to the chest at first, but like you said, the early reviews are out there. So, people are going to debate whether or not Teleportasm is a novella or an anthology. And I absolutely, it's 100% a novella. You can call it a pseudo anthology, but it's not an anthology in that you can't read it out of order. You must read it in the order they're laid out, and everything informs itself and it all ties up in the end. In that sense, it's more like the Martian Chronicles, which is laid out in chapters that seem to stand alone, but like I just said, each one informs what comes after it. So yeah, I gave myself a really great way to explore all these different angles. There's a through story that takes up, depending on how you look at it, 4 to 7 of the chapters, you can say, are the through story, and those line up chronologically. But then there are these vignette chapters where you kind of see what the tape is up to, as opposed to what the characters are up to. And, one of the things about having a VHS tape that causes short distance teleportation with euphoric after effects is that people aren't going to be able to help themselves from making copies. And, with this kind of fragile analog technology, obviously that's going to lead to a lot of potential disasters. And, allowing myself to just imagine, how could I best illustrate this kind of disaster? I could almost reverse engineer a story where I'm like, okay, how would someone end up, turned inside out, or, inserted into a tree or something like that. And then I could create these incredible little stories around them.
Yeah. I think that, I think it worked out nicely, but like the impression that you said was exactly how because I was reading it and I was like, okay, this does kind of feel like somewhat separate stories, but then I checked myself and I was like, no, this is like an ongoing thing. So, but I thought it was kind of cheekily cute that, that they're not in chronological order too. Like,
Right.
Something that allows you to jump around, kind of jumps around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stranger Things was the other kind of comparison I was thinking of.
Yes.
So,
especially in that one chapter.
yeah. Yeah. That was, I just had forgotten to say that, but, God, so like, that's the thing. I'm reading this and I'm like, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. There's so many little details. And I'm going to acknowledge right now, sometimes I get taken out of a story when the story is kind of too up its own ass about the science or like the magic or whatever. And that's never the case here. So if anybody's worried about the teleporting thing being like obsessed over, it's not.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, it's very low tech in terms of the sci-fi. The main characters are just your regular 20-year-old stoners. And if they can figure it out, you can figure it out too.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did, I feel like from my perspective as a reader, the right thing and trusting me to kind of like go along for the ride, instead of obsessing over, if they don't know this, they're not going to get why the story, like, you did a good balancing act with like,
thank you,
giving me enough science. And sometimes you dig into the science a little bit, and that's kind of interesting too. Yeah.
When it was apropos, it felt like, I had an opportunity at one point to be like, okay, for those of you who care, if there's anyone who's reading who's like, I'd like this story if I could buy into the premise a little bit more, though there's a little something for you if you stick it out, But yeah, like you said, I feel like I put the scientific exposition at a point where, if you've gotten there, you've already accepted it. So it's really just icing on the cake. It's just some sprinkles where you're like, yeah, that's why. There you go. So
right. Yeah, no. And there was, I'll always remember, and this is like a callback to probably 10 years ago. There's this, I don't know if anybody's going to even remember this book. It was called Time Pimp by Garrett Cook, Time Pimp. And it's just this ridiculous story. But one of my favorite things about that story was like, at some point they're talking about how time travel works. And the main character's just like, it's time travel. No one knows how it works.
Right.
And then no one talked about the time travel anymore. And it was just story. And I was like, oh, good job, buddy. So,
well, the chapter that does have the science, the Knights of the Penumbra, that's what my publisher and I called the X-Files chapter, the Stranger Things chapter, the CIA thriller chapter. Some of these chapters do just go far out, and that one goes far out. It's actually very inspired by the book, The Star's My Destination. Have you heard of that book?
It's not familiar with it.
Yeah, it's on all kinds of lists of like the 10 greatest sci-fis you've never heard of. The Star's My Destination. People say that that's what inspired Stephen King's The Jaunt, which is, one of the best known teleportation horror literary stories, I think. So that book kind of presents the idea of natural teleportation, and it's got its own sciencey explanation for it. But what it all boils down to, they have a great scene that's a press conference, and they've got the head scientist there answering questions, and people are asking questions, and he's almost shaming them for getting too technical. It's like people are like, "Oh, when you teleport, how come do you end up naked on the other end?" And the guy's like, "If you start naked, you'll end up naked." What a stupid question, But basically, when people get too sciencey with him, he says, "Look, it's a function of the human brain. You can teleport because you're human. That's the answer." Yeah. So I kind of took a page from that literally and was just kind of like, okay, here's your scientific explanation for organic teleportation. You can put some pieces together on your own to connect that to a analog VHS process that, gives an approximation of the same effect. But my star's the destination. The star's my destination. Can't remember who wrote it right now. Maybe you can do a little pop up on the screen or something. I
Yeah.
don't know your technical capabilities, but it's a really good teleportation science fiction story for what is essentially a very niche subgenre of both horror and science fiction.
That's awesome. Yeah, I had not heard of it, and that's the thing. Like, as much as I don't claim to be reading in any specific genre too much, I really don't get as much sci-fi or fantasy as maybe I should. Because I know but there's stuff that I read and I'm like, oh, I guess people consider that science fiction, like most of Jeff Vandermeer's stuff. But yeah, that's a blind spot for me, I think.
Yeah, it was for me too, and I kind of got into it when I was doing some of my preliminary research for this because, you're going to write a book about teleportation. You want to see what other people have already written. I went back and watched The Fly, went back and read The Jaunt, and then I was looking, for science fiction or horror stories about teleportation. And this one popped up pretty quickly and I was glad I delved into it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other. See, in my mind, when I think about this, for some reason, the exact thing that comes to mind is not a teleportation story at all. It's a different X-Files episode, and it's the one where this fucking idiot of a public storage kind of employee, he finds a rug that's got a genie inside, and he gets wishes, and it just goes horribly bad.
I remember that one. Yeah,
it's a really good episode of the X-Files. But like it's the same thing. It's like, what would normal, because that's the thing about this that I love so much, is like what would any average normal person do in a situation where they encounter something that's extraordinary,
right.
and how could it go well or how could it go poorly, and yeah, so like that's what makes me think of that. And the genie is just so fucking done with it. She's like,
right.
oh, that's so good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I loved, the way it unfolds. I really kind of tried to kind of tumble back into it organically. It acknowledged the Philadelphia experiment very early on, because that's kind of like, when you think about what's scary about teleportation, I think a lot of people instantly think about the Philadelphia experiment and just the image of sailors being fused into metal bulkheads is terrifying. And, that was kind of the jumping off point for, this teleportation horror story. And then I just kind of like went from there. It's like, okay, you'd go from, being stuck in walls with maybe being stuck in your environment with then maybe, being stuck in other people, and it goes on and on and on from there. It gets more and more, not necessarily outlandish, but it gets deeper and deeper. I guess there was kind of a sense of, trying to bring something new and unexpected to each chapter. So, there is a building effect.
You accomplished that.
Thank you. And then hopefully there's like a really big twist, like right at the last minute. Hopefully no one thought there was involved, until the very last chapter. So,
yeah, I'll agree, and I will honor that shush. Another thing I want to acknowledge, because sometimes I get so caught up in like the cool little individual moments that I forget that other people are listening to this because they want to know what's going on with this thing. I want to acknowledge that even though, like we kind of said, these are, the chapters don't stick necessarily with this group of people the whole time. You gave them character arcs. Like they started at some place and they ended up someplace else. And sometimes it's like a huge arc. Sometimes it's actually, I'm trying to think of who didn't have a big arc. Yeah, you gave them all character arcs, our four main people. And thinking back on it, I think that's probably one of the most impressive things is like in the course of 150 pages, these four people who everything is harmless in their world, more or less. Like we work at our place, we get high, we hang out with our friends, and that's pretty much it. Go from that to something very different. And so I have to give you credit for that. Like these people go through something, good or bad, I'm not going to say, and definitely are different people. They're changed.
Thank you. Yeah. they really were all unique in my mind, and I'm glad you felt so as well. And the whole idea of friendship, and like I already admitted, I kind of based the interactions on good old nostalgic memories for me. I loved these four guys, and I was sad when Teleportasm was done, and I actually feel kind of guilty about what happened to who at the very end of the last chapter. I'm like, oh man, that
Yeah.
did they deserve that? But can't go back, can't go back now, right?
Yeah.
But no, I love these guys, and I felt like I wanted each one of them to really be fleshed out as much as possible. I mean, you don't really get to know Snaps, but let's face it, Snaps is the most two-dimensional of the four, and you at least get to see him as unique among them.
Well, yes, and I would say that Snap's journey, I think, is going to stick with you more than a lot of the other ones.
That's true. He might be the most two-dimensional character, but his fate is probably the one that hits hardest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because like he's the cautionary tale. I feel in a way. It's like, what if I were in that situation? Is there a way to avoid, feeling a certain way? So, and I'm just dancing around spoilers because, like,
yeah, it's all right.
that
That's
is a
okay.
chapter I don't want people to go into knowing what happens because it's so like.
Well, we can talk about how this experience kind of like triggers something in the people who watch it. Very few people can experience this short distance teleportation and walk away unchanged,
Right?
Literally and figuratively, right? But it just it kind of like flips a switch in people, and that's kind of the drug metaphor a little bit. And it's just kind of an analogy for every once in a while your life will just completely change because of something seemingly random, and you can trace it all back, and you're like, wow, that was the night everything changed, and you wouldn't have thought it was going to be a world-shattering evening the way it started, but
Yep.
even the way it ended, sometimes you don't realize the long-term ramifications until much, much later.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just a really cool, and then, but it like so like the concept of this also gave you the opportunity to look at what would the applications, what would people choose to do with it, and obviously the first thing that anybody's going to think of is like the military wants it because if you can teleport, of course the military wants it.
Yeah, teleporting super soldiers. That's the
Yeah.
ultimate goal.
Right. But then there's also like the euphoric aspect of it. And so like and that's where the addiction and like the chasing a high kind of thing comes from. So
yeah, I think that's what I brought to the story. I don't think there's been in The Fly, Jeff Goldblum's character Seth, he comes out feeling great, and you find out later it's because he merged with this insect and he's gaining all sorts of new powers. Right. But that might have been a bit of the jumping off point. But I think it is original that like teleportation like feels good. Just imagine like how different Star Trek would be if every time someone used the transporter, they'd be on the other end being like, oh, yeah, It's just like no one ever brought that to the table, but just the idea of being kind of, I don't even know where it came from. I think it started off with the idea as it would just be a goof to watch something and be thrown across the room. Right. It would be a kick. And then I was like, okay, and it feels good too. How good? Shit, better than anything you've ever had. Right. And then again, the story then has all these options,
Well, yeah, and then that makes me think about the ingenuity of stoners. So that's got to be when I was young, when I was in high school. I was a freshman in high school. All my friends were seniors, so I was going to parties when I was too young for that kind of shit. So I was like 13, watching people do gravity bongs. And I'm having someone explain to me what a gravity bong is, and I was like, "That's fucking genius!" Like that, and I'm you're familiar with.
Hey, the first time I did a gravity bong, I thought my eyeballs were burning out from the inside. Yeah. Man, it was intense.
So like, but to me, that kind of illustrated the thing that's become like, I don't know, like a cultural thing is that like a stoner will find any way to smoke weed or whatever. But like, there's like how like all that is just like, how do I take this thing and apply it to Like how can I iterate this to make
It's
it an
ingenuity. You're
experience?
talking
Yeah.
about ingenuity. And, I love Cheech and Chong, God bless them, but they kind of, that kind of stoner stereotype didn't really exist before then. Before then, stoners were rabble rouser hippies. They were, politically
Hmm.
involved. They were taken to the street. And Cheech and
Yeah.
Chong came along, and it was so funny, and I love those guys. But they kind of gave stoners the reputation of just like sitting on a couch and you're stupid and you just say man and dude all the time. I wanted
Yeah.
to write something for stoners where it was more realistic. Stoners are
Right.
complex individuals. I'm not going to say I didn't lean into the stereotypes, but I am a stoner, so I'm allowed. So, but, I also wanted to be authentic about it. And
Right.
stoners, like you just pointed out, can be very use a lot of ingenuity. There's an
Yep.
aspect of cannabis that adds to artistic appreciation, watching movies, listening to music. There are aspects of cannabis that are great for introspection, great for writing, and it's finally being pulled out of that Class A bullshit classification. It's not like heroin and crack cocaine. It does have medicinal benefits. So, we can laugh at the things about marijuana culture that are genuinely funny, but it's a lot bigger than that. And I think people know that now. We're coming to a new time where, stoners are, stoner almost is too little a word, because
Yeah.
you're part of the cannabis community. You have a way of thinking and you have a way of connecting with people. And, it doesn't happen all the time. And maybe you know this, maybe you don't. But I found that sharing cannabis with someone is almost like one of the quickest ways to jumpstart a friendship. It's almost like you really cut to the chase and you can see whether or not you're going to click with that person. And, a lot of the
Yeah.
best friendships I've had have sparked up, pun intended, over a little bit of cannabis.
I just think it's great that this technology situation landed in the laps of a handful of like average people who, because of I don't know, like it almost feels like so Barry, for it would be my example of Barry as one of the four characters really latches on to the how it makes you feel kind of aspect of it, and um, he works out a system to
He's
like
the
use. Yeah.
entrepreneur of the group. He's the one
Yes.
who like sees this and sees the dollar signs and sees the power that could come along with he sees the value of it, and
Yep.
he can't wait to exploit it.
Yep. And then other people fall victim to it. Some
Mm-hmm.
people um,
Well, I
maybe are
think
just
the
kind
other
of
three are all in their way just completely controlled by it in one way
right.
or
Right.
another.
Yep.
Their lives from that point over are defined by the tape.
Yeah. And so it's like, man, if I could go back and change things, like would I never see this tape ever, kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. It's a quick. I mean, like it's 150 pages, so it's a quick read, but I really feel like it opens up so many things to think about. So you pulled off kind of a magic trick, if you ask me, because it makes you think about a lot of stuff. It covers a lot of ground, but it does hit those like real kind of crucial storytelling kind of things of like my characters have an arc, and I'm not up my ass about the technology of it or whatever. So
I really appreciate
yeah,
you saying that. It was a goal to keep it right around 30,000 words, in keeping with the other entries, the first two entries in the Killer VHS series. They are kind of made to be consumed in, one, maybe 1.5 sittings, just like you would a nice long film. And in doing so, yeah, I really had a chance to sharpen it up. I appreciate you mentioning the scope of it, because there were complete chapters that were thrown out in the name
yep,
of just staying with the best of it. So there might be an opportunity to give readers a little deeper dive into it. I don't know. Maybe I'll talk to Alan about releasing one of the excise chapters in a magazine or on a website or something. And, we
yeah,
can do that a little ways down the line to show people what happened to this other person who came across the tape.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like because the plot focuses around the fact that there's a physical object, and when you do something with it, it change, it has an impact on you, anybody can make that into anything. Like there's infinite possibilities with it.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it
Yeah.
absolutely was like a playground. It was a big old sandbox, and I just built this little sandcastle out of it. And I can't give Alan Lastufka, founder of Shortwave, enough credit and praise. This was, more than any other written project I've ever done, very collaborative. It was kind of necessary in the sense that he is the architect of this series. He's
Yeah.
setting the tone. And, now that mine is the third entry in the series, there's an expectation with the readers. So I wanted to work closely with him, and he, allowed that. And we just worked together to make sure it was, to just try to make sure that it was exactly what he want. I wanted to make him happy. Let me put it that way. For a long time, I was basically writing this book for an audience of one, and it was him, because he just did such a great job shepherding the first two Killer VHS novellas that I just wanted to please Alan, and I knew that when he was happy, it was ready.
Well, you mentioned that, I think, in the acknowledgments too, how you had read Brian McAuley's
Candy Cane Kills.
Candy Cane Kills, and you liked it enough to where you wanted to get involved. I think.
Hell yeah, I did. Hell yeah.
And so there was even a friendship aspect to wanting to be on this project. So
absolutely, yeah. Just to fill in briefly, Brian McAuley and I are both members of the Los Angeles chapter of the Horror Writers Association. So we were at a meeting together a couple years ago. We had both just released our first novels. He released Curse of the Reaper. I released Deeper Than Hell. We just started talking. Oh, what you working on next? Oh, Killer VHS, horror, Christmas horror. I was like, man, I have got to get on that bandwagon. Hook me up with Alan. So it wouldn't have happened without Brian. And Candy Cane Kills was a huge success. There was no small amount of anxiety knowing that I was going to be the follow-up to what has been a very successful book. But, early reviews seem to indicate that it's fitting right in with its siblings. And I couldn't be more proud and more thankful that I got to work with Alan on what I think is going to be a really fantastic, long-running series.
Yeah, it's a cool idea. And I mean, props to Shortwave in general. Last year, I launched this podcast, and I had done a podcast for 10 years before that. So I had a little bit of time in between. And last year I launched this podcast, and it was one of the things I wanted to do was like to start talking to people who I didn't talk to yet. And so I saw Adam Godfrey had a book called Narcissus, which was like and that was on Shortwave. And so I did an episode on that, and I was like, ooh, that was really good. So then Shortwave was on my radar, and then I talked to Chloe Spencer about Mewing, which was a great book. And so now, like, every time Shortwave is like, hey, well, I'm on the list now for like when they have like, upcoming stuff. But so I'm really keeping an eye on Shortwave because for two reasons. Selfishly, I love not having to read 340 pages each week or whatever. And Shortwave, for anybody who isn't aware, Shortwave, the word short is in there for a reason. Like, they publish shorter stuff, from like even chapbooks to, novellas and stuff like that. So selfishly, it makes it easier to like read and get in a conversation. But like, man, he's just doing a lot of good stuff. He's pulling up a lot of names of people that are new. He's pulling in established authors who have been around a long time, and he's putting out stuff that is just like really high quality. I think he's doing a great
really
job.
high quality. He's more than just a great editor, a great publisher. He's a great writer. He has his own novel that's an award winner. He's a great graphics designer. He designs the websites, and even though he outsources to artists, Mark Fulchick's the one who did my cover as well as the first two Killer VHS. He's an incredible graphics designer. There you go. That's it. So Alan is really like a one-stop shop. He's really an amazing individual. And you're lucky, Rob, because if you like killer VHS books, there are 2 more coming out this year. It's going to be
Nice.
a big year for the killer VHS. You got one coming out in September and another one coming out in December, I think. So, it's going to be a killer VHS kind of year.
Nice. Yeah, it's good stuff. I'm glad to. So at the beginning of the year, I did a 2024 horror preview for like January through June with Becky Spratford and Emily Hughes. And one of the things that I said was like, I'm dying to read more shorter form stuff, and probably a third of the stuff we talked about was stuff that was like fewer than 200 pages. So I feel like that's kind of like hitting a stride right now too. Like you don't have to put out a 400 page book. Like there's a different place that you can kind of occupy. So I'm
Yeah,
happy about that too.
it's not like when we were kids and a good meaty Stephen King book would kind of keep you company for an entire week. We've kind of got more on our plates. The way we consume media is different. We have so many streaming options fighting for our attention. We really do need something that's going to get at us quickly. I come from a journalism background too, and I take that into my creative writing. Never give your readers a chance to get bored and look away or zone out or, check their phone. You've got to try to keep someone engaged at every turn. And I think part of that is keeping it concise.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to shift away from talking about teleportasm specifically. But before I do that, I'm just going to encourage everybody. So it's releasing on June 25th.
25th. Yeah, but if you order directly from Shortwave, they're going to start shipping it out even earlier. You might even get it in a week if you go up and order it on Shortwave.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, it's so entertaining and fun, and you did a great job with it, and it really kind of tickles the brain in a way that, like, I think everybody should definitely check it out. So,
I can't thank you enough for having read it and for being so gracious with your commenting. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
That's the thing. Like I when I read something, when I talk to someone, I want to do them the honor of like having read the thing, but then I get so into the thing that I'm like we could probably do 3 straight hours of talking about it.
Absolutely. And for a writer to be able to talk to someone, to go this in depth into my thought process, into all the nitty gritty of it, it's an absolute pleasure. If we were, trying to keep a few things on the down low, we would absolutely be talking for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. But like, so for anybody listening, you said you're a member of the Horror Writers Association in Los Angeles. I'm a member in Chicago. So
awesome.
Yeah. We're like, I don't know, fraternity brothers or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But, so, and you mentioned that you had worked at Dread Central for a while. Really, the gist of it is, like, my impression of it is, like, you have been steeping in horror for a long time.
A long time.
So, like, what's your brief, like, what got you loving horror? And what has your journey been like, if you could kind of quickly summarize that?
Yeah, you got it. I think I loved it from the get-go since the first time I went into a video store when I was a wee lad and walked down the horror aisle and saw VHS tapes like Chud and Pumpkinhead and Fright Night. And not only was the artwork great, a lot of times the movies were just fantastic. I love being scared. I kind of took a break from all that when I went to college. Did my college thing. I was into music and traveling and things like that. And then, when Netflix hit the scene in the early aughts, I don't know if some of your listeners are going to be so young, they don't even remember that Netflix used to actually mail you a DVD, and that was considered kind of high tech. But when they first started streaming, it's not like it is now, as good as Netflix is now. When Netflix first started streaming, I had never seen such an expansive and quality horror library in my life. I had gone from being a casual horror fan to having access to the best digital horror, anything that that had been put in the digital realm, not just classics and new releases, but foreign horror. I became obsessed with French horror. You could go into, specific subgenres of horror, and I just realized I loved it and loved it and loved it. And some of my friends weren't as into horror as I was. I'd be like, "Oh, you got to watch this movie. Let me tell you about Martyrs." And they were like, "Oh, no, not for me." And they were like, "But you're so passionate when you talk about it. You should start a blog or something." And I was like, "All right, I'll do it." Because, that was like 2011 when that was the thing to do. And you hop on WordPress and then you start, clacking away and screaming into the void. But, it went from there to me loving writing about horror. I come from a creative writing background. I got a writing degree at the University of California at Santa Cruz. But then I had, had more administrative jobs. When I got into journalism, it kind of scratched my creative writing itch. Even though I was writing journalism, writing about other people's creative projects, specifically horror cinema, just felt really good. And I really became like a champion of the horror genre. It doesn't need a champion now. Horror is mainstream. It's legit. I'm talking like 10, 12 years ago, though. And it still is kind of like, people are kind of like, "Oh, horror movie. Let me turn up my nose at cinema's redheaded stepchild." It's not like that anymore. Thank goodness. It's a wonderful time to, be a horror creator, because there are so many people out there clamoring for something new. Didn't used to be that way. But yeah, I've always considered myself more than just a horror connoisseur. I'm a horror advocate. I love curating horror movies, turning people on to new horror movies. And when I transitioned back into the creative space, when I went from journalism back into writing novels and fiction, I took a lot of the lessons I had learned from both journalism and horror cinema into the creative process. And both of those things, journalism, like I already mentioned, helping me keep things tight, helping me keep things sharp. Horror cinema for the way it builds, for the way it shows symbolism, for, the way I learned about character arcs and, different interpretations of scary, the way horror reflects societal fears and things like that. It all informs how I write. And, if I could just keep writing books like Teleportasm for the rest of my life, I would be happy as hell.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. So what's I'm going to leave this as vague as possible. So what's happening in horror right now that's like got you really excited?
There have been some good films so far this year. The first Omen was great. I mean, it's not one of the best ever, but it's certainly one of the best in a good long time. I was really happy to check that out. Late Night with the Devil is another one that I thought was incredible. So as far as horror goes, it's been a good year, and I think we've got some other great things to look forward to. Like I said, as somebody who, used to feel like a freak for loving horror movies, it's just so awesome to see horror having its moment in the sun, where it's one of the main drivers at the box office and, streaming services. And horror is just, directors and content creators like Mike Flanagan, are really elevating horror on both, the streaming side and the film side. And so many great writers in the sphere today. Like you mentioned, Shortwave is almost like a who's who of just wonderful, diverse writers, all of whom are making a buzz in their own way right now. So, check out Shortwave and, look at their author pages, and you'll see a lot of faces you recognize, and you might meet some new ones like me. And yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, I'm talking to Clay McLeod Chapman next week.
Awesome guy. I mean, I haven't met him personally, but if you follow him on Twitter and Facebook, you feel like you know him. He makes all those videos where it's like he's talking directly to you. And just having followed his adventures at StokerCon recently, yeah, I imagine that'll be quite a show.
Yeah. StokerCon. So I was like, oh, I should go to StokerCon. And then I was like, oh, I need to pay bills and stuff. So that's like why,
Same. And for me, it was a little heartbreaking too, because it'll probably never be closer to me. I'm in Los Angeles and it was in San Diego, and I
right.
could have, I didn't even need to pay for a hotel because I got family down there, but it was just, you can't really do it on the cheap. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't have been a financial hardship or anything, but I'm a dad. I have a toddler. My book's coming out in just a few weeks. But yeah, I'd love to go to StokerCon someday.
Yeah. And that was kind of like, I was like, oh man, I really want to, like, I've got this, like, my podcast is newer. I want to, like, talk to people. Didn't get to go. But then I was like, and the other thing is, so I don't know how much time you spent in the Midwest. Not a lot of stuff happens in the Midwest. Like it's kind of flyover. So for the most part, when people are like, when the bigger names are doing their stuff, they're doing it on the West Coast or the East Coast. And like
Right.
Chicago's easy to miss. But I found a few things in the next few months that I'm going to, like, Paul Tremblay's going to be in town next week. So
Nice.
I'm very excited about that. And I love Paul.
He's another one I don't know personally, but I love following on social media. I can learn a lot from those guys. I need to start, being a better brand ambassador for myself. Those guys do a great job of really connecting with their readers.
They really do. But like, man, I see like Clay especially. I see him and I'm like,
what energy?
Where does he summon that energy? Exactly.
Right.
And where does he get that from? Like
running around bookstores, hollering at strangers. Yeah. He's quite a character.
But
hopefully he's watching this right now.
I know, right? Well, yeah. So he feels more comfortable coming on and talking to me next week. But there's a threat.
Paranormal Experience.
Yeah, it's a Paranormal Experience. Probably a ghost getting angry at me, but
it's got to be.
There's a thread in that kind of thought that I've talked about with other people, and I want to see what your take is on it. And that and because usually I'm talking to authors, but like your perspective is more film, and in addition to books and stuff like that. I feel like the horror community has like I'm gonna try and say this in a way that doesn't offend people.
Hey, yeah.
The best, my favorite people that I see are the people who are so enthusiastic about the stuff as opposed to like promoting themselves. And so I feel like Clay's that way. There's a bunch of people who just work really hard for the love of horror. And I maybe it's just because I don't look at other genres that much, but I feel like that's probably one of the best qualities of horror. If it's not unique, it's definitely something that I think is like one of the best things about it is that the people who love it, they want it to just like, they want everybody to know about it. So
absolutely. Just in my own story, I went into it through fandom. I loved these horror movies and I wanted to tell everyone else how great they are. I never got any pleasure in writing bad reviews. I would rather not write a review than write a bad review. I just love telling people about great horror movies or, helping people see the greatness in movies they might otherwise dismiss. You're correct that I'm very much steeped in the film side of horror. But that's another thing that I think is so wonderful about this Killer VHS series is that it really demands that you keep one toe at least dipped in horror cinema throughout the literary process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. All right. So before we wrap it up, I'm just going to, because we talked a little bit about urban myths before, I'm going to tell you a quick story about. So I was living in Vermont, 2009 to 2011, and I was living in this like little tiny town, but I was living in this building in like the downtown area, and it was like above like an Outfitters or whatever, like a like a REI kind of place, and it's this really old building, but it was like you could tell at some point it was a nice building because there was like a marble staircase and stuff like that, and weird things kind of like happened every now and then, but like easily explained. Like something would be moved around in my apartment, but I had also asked them to do something to the bathroom or whatever. Like, so like I always knew that there was like, oh, it's the guy came in and did the thing or whatever. So like, but it was always kind of weird a little bit. And so, but like one day, I get in the elevator because there's an elevator. It's a 5-story building. There's an elevator. I get in the elevator, go up a floor, and then the guy who's like the kind of handyman, he's like the guy who, you know, he lives there, but he like gets like cheaper rent because he's the handyman.
Yeah.
That guy gets on, and I'm like, that shirt looks familiar.
No.
And so we're going up the elevator, and I'm like, wow, what a coincidence that this guy has the same shirt as me.
Oh no.
And then I'm thinking to myself, oh, it's been a while since I've seen that shirt. And so by the time I get to on the 5th floor, by the time I get to the 5th floor, I'm like, that's my shirt. Like, it took that long, you know, like, but finally I figured out this guy's got my shirt.
Yeah.
And then like, so I'm like panicking. I'm like, how does this guy have my shirt? What is going on? But then I'm thinking about all the other weird stuff that was happening. And like, there was just a moment where I was like, is this guy slowly taking over my life? Like, am I going to be like, am I going to vanish one day? Like, it got so weird that there was just this one moment of like, you know, just complete, like reality was wavering. And I was like, this guy is trying to slowly become me. And it was like the weirdest shit ever. So
that's pretty weird.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Now, did you actually like find it like tucked away somewhere and realize, oh, it was just a total coincidence? We have the same shirt.
Nope.
So is there a possibility then that you left it in the laundry room? And
that's my guess. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that has to be the guess, right?
Right. And that's the thing. It all has like logical explanations.
Sure.
But
that's the only thing that kind of saves you from being like, oh yeah, I almost died. Sure. Right. I was in an elevator with a guy who almost killed me. Yeah, that happened. Yeah.
But I think that illustrates how like my whole feeling about those types of urban legends and stuff like that is like, I know it's like I dropped it out of the laundry basket and this guy just happened to find it and it was my size or whatever. But there's enough weirdness where you're like, well, and that's, I think, the part that I love the most about it is like, for a moment I was like seriously considering that.
Yeah. That's the fun of creepypastas and urban legends and conspiracy theories right there.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. So, Josh, is it okay that I call you Josh or is it Joshua?
Absolutely. No, my friends call me Josh.
Well, I guess I'm your friend now.
Yes, you are, Rob.
Ties it around to the beginning where we were talking about friendship.
Exactly.
Josh, thanks so much, man, for coming on and talking to me. But here's the thing. I've been thanking people for joining me and talking to me forever. I want to thank you for giving me the experience of having something super entertaining to read and tickling my mind and making me think about things. So thank you so much for making teleportasm so that I could experience it and want to talk to you about it.
Oh man, you just made me feel fantastic, buddy. I couldn't be more thrilled. I think your podcast is fantastic, and it's been an honor for me to share your platform. To share your platform? Oh my god. To share your platform and to meet your viewers. Thank you so much.